I remember the exact night the quiet in our house began to sound like accusation. It was a Thursday, the kind of ordinary weekday that feels like a rehearsal for the weekend. The radiator clicked in the hallway. The sink had a small ring where a mug had dried. I was standing by the window, hands in my pockets, watching rain stitch tiny rivers down the glass, and for reasons that felt at once absurd and absolute, I thought, she is somewhere else. My name is Tom. I was 37 when jealousy colonized my life. I work in logistics, which means I live by timetables and contingency plans. My wife, Claire, taught drama at the local college. That was partly why we worked so well when we did. I liked order. She liked the messy, human flares. We'd been married 7 years. We had a rental that squeaked in winter, a potted fig tree that insisted on living in the bedroom, and a Sunday ritual of making pancakes too sweet to be healthy. People said we balanced each other. We told ourselves the same thing. Jealousy is a soft animal until it isn't. It begins with an itch you scratch, and then find yourself digging further. For me, it arrived as an almost mundane unease. Claire coming home with lipstick on a coffee cup, her phone face down where it used to lie carefree and open, her laughter at a message I'd never see. These were small things, the kind of evidence that can be rationalized into nothing. Everyone is busy, everyone texts. But those small things became a drumbeat. I found myself waiting for cadence, for pattern. Human brains, after all, are pattern machines. Give one enough noise and it will build a map. I tried to be rational. We spoke like adults about boundaries and trust. "You're reading too much into nothing," she told me once, soft but firm, when I asked about late emails. I believed her sometimes. I wanted to. But you cannot spend years making a life with someone and then switch off the sensory apparatus the moment suspicion whispers. For me, suspicion became the only radio station I could tune into. The first time I followed her, I felt stupid, like an actor in a low-budget movie, and guilty before I had done anything. It was a Wednesday, and she said she had a rehearsal late. I sat in my car half a mile away from the theater, one streetlight blinking in the drizzle, while she ducked into a rehearsal room and became other women for a few hours. She was radiant when she left, breathless and flushed, carrying the kind of vulnerability that made her incandescent. She smiled wide when she saw me, like I had surprised her with flowers. I wanted to believe she had been fully herself. But after she fell asleep that night, mouth slack, I watched over the bed and found my eyes scanning her face for the slightest bruise of another person. A smell, a crease, like a man trying to read a map that used to be his. Once the habit begins, it finds ways to justify itself. I checked her messages when she left her laptop open. They were boring. Production schedules, student notes, questions about props. But habits breed hypothesis, and hypotheses become conviction in the dark. If your mind wants to find betrayal, it will find subtexts that the obvious eye misses. The word Eli kept appearing in little ways: a tagged photo on a college page, a mention in a rehearsal roster, a name on an old curriculum vitae she'd been reviewing. A farmer on the internet offers you corn if you leave a pile of seed at his feet. Jealousy is similar. You feed it a breadcrumb, and it expects a feast. I started making contingency lists the way I'd once planned for storms. Who would take the dog, which accounts needed passwords, the exact dates that might be worth remembering. Planning is the human expression of power. When my life seemed to slip, plans were the things I could still fold like paper into shape. I'll be transparent. Some of the things I did were petty. I once left 3 voicemails, sounding calm and reasonable, but each word heavier than the last, then deleted them and pretended I hadn't. I checked her commuter times. I made a spreadsheet of nights she said she'd be at work and nights she was not. Statistical analysis in the service of self-torture. There was a man everyone talked about at the college. His name was Miles. Visiting lecturer, charismatic presence, eyes like someone who'd listened to sad stories for a living. He held workshops that drew students in the way rain draws ants. People responded to him the way moths respond to a lamp. It wasn't surprising anyone found his manner attractive. The problem was that I saw the attraction like a contagion and began to watch for symptoms. If you have spent enough time keeping a ledger of suspicion, the ledger grows fangs. I caught Claire laughing at his jokes in a staff room photo and felt a physical sickness. I scolded myself for my reaction, but jab after jab, suspicion tightened into a rope around a throat. The thing about jealousy is that it rarely arrives naked. It brings with it memory. The time my father left a dinner party early, the time a roommate once betrayed me, the many small dissolutions of trust I had watched as a child. Jealousy is often less about what your partner does and more about what you fear you might be again, abandoned, unseen, replaced. We tried to talk. I did what men do. I drafted speeches in my head where I was honest but not cruel. I'd rehearse asking the right questions in the right tone. The conversations were different in practice. One night, after another rehearsal where Claire said she'd be late, I sat the two of us down in the kitchen under the hum of a single pendant light and pushed my voice across the table. "Are you seeing someone?" I asked. My hands were steady because they had been rehearsed to be steady. Claire looked at me like I had asked whether the sky had blue. She laughed, at first lightly, in disbelief, and then her face moved to something taut and brittle. "Tom," she said softly, "I would tell you." "But you're not telling me everything," I said. "You're shutting me out." She set her cup down with a small clink. "I'm not shutting you out," she said. "I am alive in my work. I have needs that are not all about you. This," she tapped the mug, "isn't a competition." "She calls it being alive," I muttered later into my pillow, my ears burning with the combination of truth and indirectness. We had moved past boundaries of tenderness into the arithmetic of offenses. A language that had once been shared had turned into separate dialects. She spoke in rehearsals and subplots. I spoke in timetables and lists. Things escalated quietly. One evening, I found a lipstick-stained napkin under the passenger seat of the car. I pretended it was from a coffee run. I flushed it down the sink after convincing myself of a dozen plausible stories. But plausibility does not heal the pulsing doubt. I started to live with a half-life. I attended meetings at work with a kind of fog pressing in the back of my skull. I answered clients with my teeth clenched. At home, Claire would talk about a complicated student. I would imagine them at her wrist, and my pulse would stutter. One night, the knot tightened into a rope. I was downstairs, trying to make a sandwich without making a sound, and I heard her laugh in the bedroom, soft and delighted. The laugh had a cadence I knew too well. It was a laugh she reserved for good news and secret pleasures. I carried my plate quietly into the living room and saw on the coffee table a photograph with the camera's timestamp. Claire leaned into someone in the picture. They were at a theater bar, a dark, gilded place. The man's face was mostly out of frame, but there was a profile, a jaw, an ear, the tilt of a head. I felt my hands go cold. Then she came into the room in a robe, hair wet, the steam from the shower drying in little halos around her shoulders. She smiled, as she always had, but there was a new steady in her gaze, something private. I cannot explain the thought with any honor. It was sudden and animal. It would be better, I thought, if I caught her in the act. That way there would be clarity. That way there would be reason. No ambiguity. No slow poison. It was a childish logic and an adult cruelty. I planned to arrange for clarity by making ambiguity impossible. In the end, it was not bravery that got me to the theater basement where she and the visiting lecturers hung out after shows. It was sorrow that masqueraded as purpose. I walked into the corridor that smelled of old paint and cheap cologne and ambled into a doorway where chairs were stacked. Voices muffled behind a curtain. I listened. They were talking about scene work and projection and timing, the ordinary talk of people who are professional at feeling. Then Miles's voice rose, low and easy. "You've got something," he was saying to Claire, and I felt a small electric shock of envy that was almost holy in its intensity. The curtain moved. A silhouette slipped out and nearly collided with me. It was Claire, laughing with the same breathless ease I had seen from my car. She spotted me, and the laugh died into a small apology. Her face had the look of someone discovered in mid-laughter. For a beat, I registered the sight of her, the honest way her cheeks crinkled. I expected shame to wash across her features. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Confusion, maybe, or mortification, and then the theater room emptied into prosaic light. People moved around, indistinguishable. Chairs scraped. A student dropped a script. I stepped forward because my throat felt like something clogged. "Tom," Claire said. Her voice had the part hurt, part explanation that belongs to someone who has already rehearsed the conversation in their head. The conversation that followed was not cinematic. It was small, domestic. I asked the questions I had compiled in my head. She answered as best she could. "It's harmless. He's a colleague. He's charismatic." She touched my arm the way someone touches a wound with a cotton ball. Careful, but faint. "You keep saying that," I said. "But the evidence—" I wanted to show her the spreadsheet, the timestamps, the napkins, the photos. I wanted to be incontrovertible. "The lipstick, the messages—" "I don't know what you want me to say," she said, voice narrowing. "You can't live like this. You need to stop making mountains out of molehills." Mountains out of molehills. I had heard that before. The phrase is a neat lie. It suggests that you are dramatic, unstable, hysterical. It assumes gravity where there might be none. It is a phrase people use when they want to preserve comfort by dismissing alarm. I felt it like a slap, a defense. From then on, our conversations turned into small skirmishes. I accused, she deflected. I tried to be logical, she accused me of controlling. She forbade me from following her, which in a way was the only dignified thing left. I wrote notes instead. Apologies, plans, lists of things I would do to show that I was reasonable. Reason dissolved into pleas. Something else happened when I let jealousy become the axis of my days. I began to perform suspicion. People around us noticed. Friends stopped inviting us to dinner because the rooms felt taut. The fig tree died. Not from neglect, but because I kept moving it from room to room, attempting to rearrange the life around the needs of paranoia. Work became a dangerous place for me. I made an error on a shipment. A client lost patience. When the manager asked if everything was okay, I lied and nodded. Then there was a night of sharp clarity that would later feel like a turning point. I'd come home early because I needed to see whether the story I had built in my head held up in daylight. The front door was closed. Everything seemed normal. The television was off. I could see a vase knocked askew on the mantel, a book left open at a page. In the kitchen, a half-drunk glass of wine sat cooling. On the table, a postcard from a place we used to plan to visit. It stared like an accusation. I opened the hallway closet because I wanted some trivial evidence of movement. A coat I didn't recognize, perhaps. And there, folded like a small betrayal, was a letter. It wasn't long. Handwritten, the ink faint. Claire's handwriting, yes, but a voice I had not heard in months. She had left me, I thought, in the instant my stomach dropped, left me in a letter. But the letter was not a note of leaving. It was a note of love and of fear. She wrote about wanting to feel again, about rehearsals where she could forget the measured life, about how sometimes being with me felt like performing the best version of myself, and she did not know if she wanted to perform forever. She wrote that she loved me and that she felt trapped, and that she was afraid of hurting me, but more afraid of not being honest. It had been placed in the closet, perhaps by someone who meant it to be secret. The letter did not give me comfort. A confession is a cheap thing if it comes with nothing but words. I folded the paper carefully and felt a cold rage at my throat. The more I read, the more my feelings split like cracked glass. Part grief, part relief, part a desolate vindication. Someone who feels trapped will sometimes look for an exit. When that exit appears, it is not always illicit in the way people in novels imagine. Often it is merely an aperture of attention, of being seen elsewhere. I confronted her again. This time the tone of our fight changed. The argument was not about proof, but about identity. "You are making me choose," she said. "You want to make me belong to your fear rather than the person I am." "I want the person I married," I said. There was a quiet there, not like reconciliation, but like the clearing after a storm. We both sat down on the couch, exhausted, as if all the energy of our conflict had been used up in trying to be righteous. We swapped lists, she of what she wanted, I of what I needed. They did not match in any single place. After that night, Claire began staying away more. Not out of malice, she told me, but out of a need to breathe. I paid the dog walker extra. I rediscovered old friends. I sent apologies and small essays on how I would be less controlling. Sometimes I meant them. Sometimes I only meant to salvage what was left. The house drifted into routines we no longer shared. Months slid like rain down the window. Miles, the visiting lecturer, left at term's end. He had that fellowship in the city that liners get when they have been charming enough to get an agent. He wrote an email thanking the department for their hospitality and listed workshops he hoped to return for. I read his words like a man trying to measure how much he had been left behind. Claire called to say he had left, and she felt empty in an unfamiliar way. That was the word she used. Empty. It was a hollow that had nothing to do with me in particular. It belonged to her work and her choices. At some strange point, I reached a decision. To be the person who stays honest and human or the person who stays imprisoned by fear. The choice was not clear. Fear is seductive. It promises certainty. But certainty is often the currency of tyrants and small men. I began, haltingly, to go to therapy. I sat across from a woman named June who had a patient way of listening. She asked me about my childhood, about my father, about the small dissolutions of trust I had swallowed like bitter tea. She asked me about my fantasies. What did I imagine would happen if I confronted Claire in public? If I shouted, if I left? I described things I was embarrassed by. She did not flinch. "There's a difference between jealousy and vigilance," she said once. "One keeps you safe. The other takes you somewhere you will not want to come back from." I had already been traveling that path. I realized then how much of my behavior had been attempts to preserve an image of myself, the good husband, the reasonable man. What I had not allowed for, in myself or in our marriage, was the messy, undignified fact that people grow in ways you cannot anticipate. I also learned that confession from a partner is only useful when it is followed by repair, and repair is uneven and costly. Claire and I had a last long conversation one winter evening when the fig tree's leaves had finally given up and fallen into a frost of brown on the windowsill. She sat across from me, hands folded like someone who has decided the future needs to be named. She said she loved me. She also said she needed to know who she was without the grammar of our marriage. She spoke with the weary clarity of someone who had rehearsed solitude and decided to step into it. When she left 3 days later with a suitcase and a small apologetic hug for the dog, it was not violent. She kissed the top of my head and told me to take care. It was the gentlest untangling I had ever been given and also the cruelest. After she left, my jealousy did not evaporate. Jealousy is like a scar. It heals but leaves its map behind. I missed her in ways that made my chest feel like an overstuffed pocket. I emptied drawers of letters and kept a single one, the one where she had called me her safe place. I read it until the ink blurred. The house felt too quiet. The radio static filled the gaps. I started to keep a record not of her absences, but of my own moments of clarity. I read books I had ignored. I went for walks on the river, speaking to the dogs so that the world would hear my voice. Time has a way of telescoping grief. A year later, I see Claire occasionally across campus corridors. We nod like two colleagues who have been through something private and have chosen civility. I have dated badly and briefly. I have been foolish and kinder. Sometimes I think I have learned that human beings are messy, and that to love is to accept that mess and still stay. Sometimes I think I have learned nothing at all. I do not know whether jealousy ever served me except as a tutor. It taught me about the prowling animal in my brain that wanted to own and to preempt. It taught me the cost of trying to control the uncontrollable, another person's heart. It taught me that the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, that we are steady, reliable, not the type to stalk or to track or to demand explanations, are often thinner than we imagine. If there is a moral, it is small. Notice the small things, not as evidence to trap someone, but as signals to reconnect. Ask the question before suspicion becomes a plan. And if you find the answer painful, do not let your pain become the reason someone else must pay for it with their life. This is not a neat redemption. I still sit by the window sometimes and let the rain make maps on the glass. I watch the fig tree sprout tentative leaves every spring and think about the stubbornness of living things. I still feel that old ache when I hear a laugh that used to mean only home. But jealousy has softened into memory's shape, and memory is a thing you can set on a shelf and visit without living there. If you made it to the end of this, thank you for listening. If this story landed anywhere close to your own life, be brave enough to ask for help. Talk to someone. And if you want more stories like this, consider liking and subscribing. It helps other people find voices that know, painfully and humanly, what it is to lose and to learn.